In the dominant narrative of the colonization of the Americas, native peoples are often portrayed in stark and simplistic terms, as noble, tragic victims swept aside by the tide of civilization. Gallant but doomed warriors facing the unstoppable advance of European empires. Their stories often end in silence and subjugation. But not all. In the vast, wind-swept grasslands of the southern Great Plains, one native nation defied that narrative entirely. They didn't just resist the colonial advance, they reversed it. They built a powerful empire not from stone, but from speed, skill, and steel. And for over a century, they dominated their rivals, terrorized colonial powers, and forged a society unlike any other on the continent. This is the story of the Comanche, the horse lords of the southern plains. The only Native American people who turned back the tide of colonization, built an empire on horseback, and fought the United States, Mexico, and Spain to a standstill. The Comanches were not always the masters of the southern plains. Their story begins in a very different landscape, among a very different people. The Shoshone, a tribe native to the mountainous terrain of what is today Wyoming and Utah. In the pre-Columbian era, the Shoshone lived as pedestrian hunter-gatherers. There were no horses in North America at that time. They traveled in small bands, hunting deer and elk in the forests and fishing in the cold mountain streams. Their tools were simple, their movements slow, and their lifestyle tuned to the cycles of nature. But this way of life began to break down in the 17th century, when the Little Ice Age, a global period of cooling, made their mountainous homeland increasingly uninhabitable. The growing cold forced many Shoshone to migrate southeast into the Great Plains. By the mid-1600s, one branch of the eastern Shoshone had settled between the Platte and Missouri rivers. The terrain was open, the skies wide, and most critically, the plains were filled with millions of buffalo. The Shoshone adapted quickly, learning to follow and hunt the bison herds. They used dog-drawn sleds, called travois, to carry their belongings, and traveled in pursuit of food and hides. But despite their adaptation, hunting bison on foot was extremely dangerous and inefficient. These animals could weigh over 2,000 pounds, run at speeds up to 35 miles per hour, and were capable of killing a man with a single charge. Everything changed with the arrival of the horse. The horse had vanished from the Americas for over 10,000 years, driven to extinction by ancient hunting. But in the 16th century, the Spanish reintroduced the horse to the New World. These were hardy, fast, and adaptable animals, the descendants of Andalusian breeds. Initially intended for transport and war, many Spanish horses escaped or were stolen, and they quickly bred and spread across the continent. By the late 1600s, wild mustangs were proliferating in the plains. To the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains, the horse was not just an animal, it was a revolution. A horse could carry 4 times the weight of a large dog and travel twice the distance in a single day. Mounted hunters could now chase buffalo, not just drive them off cliffs. They could travel greater distances, transport more goods, and wage war faster and farther than ever before. The horse transformed entire cultures. It created new identities, economies, and rivalries. Tribes that mastered the horse became the dominant powers of the plains, and the Shoshone were among the earliest adopters. But in the early 1700s, a split occurred. A subgroup of eastern Shoshone migrated south into what is now Texas and Oklahoma, drawn by warmer weather, richer bison herds, and, most importantly, proximity to Spanish New Mexico, where the horse trade was booming. This group quickly seized control of the local horse trade, subjugated nearby tribes, and embraced the horse so completely that it transformed their culture, language, and society. Within just 2 generations, they had gone from a people who had never seen a horse to the greatest mounted warriors in North America. They called themselves the Nermerna, the people. But their enemies, the Utes, gave them another name, Comanche, the enemy. When the Comanches arrived on the southern plains in the early 1700s, they entered a crowded battlefield. The Spanish held towns and forts in Texas and New Mexico. The French loomed in Louisiana, and other native nations, the Apaches, Pawnee, and Wichita, competed fiercely for dominance. But none would match the ferocity, mobility, and tactical genius of the Comanches. Their first major target was the Plains Apache, a martial and proud people. Despite fierce resistance, the Apaches could not withstand the speed and relentlessness of Comanche raids. By the 1740s, the Comanches had driven the Apaches south, enslaved many of their people, and taken control of central Texas. The Comanche war machine did not stop there. They began launching deep raids into Spanish territory, striking at missions, ranches, and settlements. These raids were not occasional. They were relentless. Thousands of cattle and horses were stolen. Hundreds of people were captured, enslaved, or killed. Entire Spanish communities were abandoned. Santa Fe became a city of refugees. Comanche warriors were simply faster, more skilled, and better adapted to plains warfare than Spanish soldiers. They used hit-and-run tactics, rode in complex formations, and executed military feints that left colonial troops bewildered. By the 1780s, the Comanches had turned northern Mexico into a no-man's land. The Spanish Empire, for all its might and wealth, could not advance beyond the Rio Grande. The Empire of Spain had been halted by a people who had no castles, no cannons, only horses, bows, and pure skill. What made the Comanches so successful? Why were they able to dominate rival tribes and colonial powers alike? The answer lies in the structure of Comanche society. Unlike many of their neighbors, the Comanches were a full-time warrior culture. They did not farm, weave, or build permanent settlements. Their society was entirely mobile, centered on buffalo hunting and raiding. As historian S.C. Gwynn wrote, they were akin to the Spartans, a society stripped down to its martial essentials. Their tactics, however, resembled the Mongols. Comanches were master horse archers. They used short Osage orange wood bows, capable of firing a dozen arrows in the time it took a European soldier to reload a musket. These bows, fired from horseback at full gallop, could kill with deadly precision. They also carried lances, buffalo hide shields, and later, firearms, which they acquired through trade and raids. Trying to catch a Comanche warrior in battle was like trying to catch a shadow. They rode in circles around their enemies, never standing still, always striking from an angle. They were not invincible, but they were damn close. But the Comanche were more than just raiders. They were diplomats, traders, and networkers. Their empire, called Comancheria, stretched from the Arkansas River to northern Mexico, and they maintained vast trade networks across the continent. They allied with the Kiowa, Wichita, and even traded with the Spanish and French, selling buffalo hides, meat, and horses in exchange for guns, grain, and metal goods. The slave trade was also a pillar of their economy. Comanches enslaved white settlers, Mexicans, blacks, and other indigenous peoples, often selling them to the Spanish or integrating them into their society. Comanche society was also remarkably open. Anyone could become Comanche if they were adopted or married into the tribe. And anyone could be enslaved, regardless of race. They were not a unified state. Comancheria was made up of up to 13 independent bands, each with its own leadership. War and peace chiefs were elected by merit and could be removed by consensus. Despite this lack of central authority, the Comanche functioned as a cohesive power, capable of banding together for massive war efforts when needed. By the early 1800s, the Comanches were at their height, but so too were the forces gathering against them. In 1821, Mexico declared independence from Spain. For a brief period, the Comanches and the new Mexican state cooperated. But when Mexico failed to meet its trade obligations, the Comanches responded with devastating raids. From Texas to Durango, northern Mexico became a war zone. The Comanches burned villages, stole livestock, and created a humanitarian disaster that hollowed out the region. In desperation, Mexico invited Anglo settlers into Texas to act as a buffer. But the move backfired. The settlers, soon calling themselves Texans, rebelled, and in 1836, the Republic of Texas was born. The new republic had no interest in peace with the Comanches. Settlers expanded deep into Comancheria, and the Comanches retaliated with raids, including the famous Fort Parker raid, where Cynthia Ann Parker was captured. She would later give birth to Quanah Parker, the Comanche chief who would lead the final resistance. The Texas Rangers, a mounted militia armed with Colt revolvers, began to push back. The old advantage of Comanche speed was fading. 6 bullets replaced 1 musket shot. The battlefield was evolving. Then came the Mexican-American War. In 1848, Texas was annexed by the United States, and now it was Washington, not Mexico, that faced the Comanches. The Americans came west, not to negotiate but to settle. The Comanches fought back with everything they had. But the world had changed. By the 1860s, repeating rifles, railroads, and ever-growing white settlements pushed deeper into the plains. Then came disease. In 1862, a smallpox epidemic ravaged the Comanche population. From a peak of 40,000, they dropped to just 5,000. And then the United States targeted the buffalo. In the largest animal extermination in human history, millions of buffalo were slaughtered between 1868 and 1881. Their bones were sold for fertilizer. Their hides were sold for industry. The Comanches' way of life, built entirely on the buffalo, was shattered. In 1874, Quanah Parker led one last great war. But it was too late. In 1875, he surrendered at Fort Sill, leading the last free band of Comanches to the reservation in Oklahoma. Comancheria was no more. But the Comanche are not gone. Today, the Comanche Nation has over 17,000 enrolled members, most living in Oklahoma. They are a federally recognized tribe with a proud culture, thriving traditions, and a vibrant presence in American life. Their empire is gone, but their legacy endures. As the only Native American power to stop European expansion, to create an empire from the saddle, and to write their own story in the blood and dust of the southern plains. They were not victims. They were not savages. They were warriors, traders, diplomats, and empire builders. They were Comanche. If you want more stories like this of Native power, empire, and resistance, hit subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to never miss an upload. Got a topic we should explore next? Leave it in the comments. Thanks for watching.